Well, hello everyone, and I'm Mark Pinto here at Phoenixville Public Library, welcoming you to tonight's Zoom presentation honoring Clara Barton in the year of the 200th anniversary of her birth. Most people recognize her name as the founder of the American Red Cross. Well, tonight we'll learn more about her life and her many other accomplishments. We're happy to have with us tonight Lynn Cohen and Bill Thawley from the Delaware Valley chapter of the American Red Cross. Bill and Lynn, thank you for doing this presentation. Welcome, and I'm going to turn things over to Lynn.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Mark, for having us and inviting us to speak and share a lot of information about how wonderful Clara was. We are really excited to speak at the Phoenixville Library and to share this information with your patrons and members this evening. I'm Lynn, and I am a senior volunteer recruitment specialist with the Delaware Valley chapter. And we are the serving Delaware, Chester, and Montgomery counties in Pennsylvania. And I've been with the Red Cross for about 3 years. I love it. I love working with volunteers who love to show up every day like Bill. These folks are always ready to give back and be a part of our humanitarian mission that Clara created for us. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our amazing volunteer, Bill Thawley. He is going to give and share his expertise and introduce you to Clara. I'm going to just share an overview of our services at the end as we wrap up, and a few different volunteer opportunities that are critical right now. So we just wanted to give you an idea of who we are and where we are. So we serve the southeastern Pennsylvania region. You'll see there are 2 chapters in our region, Philadelphia chapter and the Delaware Valley chapter. And with that, I'm going to play a video and turn it over to Bill shortly thereafter. So.
Clara Barton is one of the most respected women in American history. As founder of the American Red Cross, she is considered a visionary whose humanitarian spirit truly helped change the world. Clara was born on December 25, 1821, in North Oxford, Massachusetts. After an early career in teaching, she moved to Washington, D.C. and worked at the U.S. Patent Office as one of the first women to work for the federal government. Clara was still living in Washington when the U.S. Civil War began in 1861. During that time, she bravely provided nursing care and supplies to soldiers, activities that ultimately defined her life and earned her the nickname Angel of the Battlefield. With permission from President Lincoln, she opened the Office of Missing Soldiers and helped reconnect more than 20,000 soldiers with their families. During a trip to Switzerland in 1869, Clara learned about the Red Cross movement, a European humanitarian effort established in 1863 to provide neutral aid to those injured in combat. Inspired by that cause, Clara remained in Europe, volunteering with the International Committee of the Red Cross, providing civilian relief in France during the Franco-Prussian War. This experience, along with her work during the Civil War, inspired Clara to bring the Red Cross movement to America. In the years that followed, Clara worked tirelessly to secure U.S. government support for the Red Cross, to provide humanitarian aid in times of disaster and war, and to ratify the Geneva Conventions. Her efforts were rewarded on May 21, 1881. At age 59, Clara founded the American Red Cross, and by 1882, the U.S. ratified the Geneva Conventions, laws that still today protect the war wounded, aid workers, and civilians in conflict zones. Later, the U.S. passed a congressional charter, officially recognizing the role of the Red Cross in disaster relief activities. Clara Barton served as Red Cross president for 23 years, retiring in 1904. After a lifetime of service at the age of 90, Clara died at her home in Glen Echo, Maryland on April 12, 1912. To this day, Clara's legacy lives on, reflected in the humanitarian spirit of Red Cross volunteers and employees throughout the United States, bringing help, hope, and comfort every day across the nation and around the world.
So that's Clara's story. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our fabulous volunteer, Bill Thawley. So Bill, you may want to introduce yourself a little bit, and I'm going to go off camera. So please meet Bill.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting us. That slide you're looking at now, I shall never do a man's work for less than a man's pay. Remember that. I'll go over that in the story. But my main role is in volunteer services. I interview prospective volunteers to find a place for them in the Red Cross. And if you think we just do disaster and blood and service to the armed forces, we have a whole host of other things that we do. We have a great blog, which I've written about Clara Barton. We have photographers, many things, and I do a lot of those things. So I'm retired. I'm a retired pharmacist, and I want to keep busy. I want to keep my mind active. So I just keep taking more and more Red Cross courses, which I used to have to do when I was a pharmacist. So anyway, Clara Barton, her full name is Clarissa Harlow Barton. And that Clarissa name came from a story, a book, and it was by Samuel Richardson. And his novel was called Clarissa. Anyway, her father and mother, like they said in the story, born December 25th, 1821, North Oxford, Massachusetts. And it was on a farm. Her father owned a farm, raised horses, and they were both very progressive. They founded a church. Her father was a captain in the War of 1812. So Clara's childhood was sort of normal for that time. You got to remember 1821, she could ride horses. She learned to read at a very early age. So moving a little forward, her brother fell in the barn and he was bedridden for 2 years. Clara cared for him. The doctors basically gave up. And as you know, back in 1832, one of the things they did was they bled you with leeches. Well, that didn't work. Clara thought of a lot of better things to do, and she did it. She took care of her brother. Eventually, he survived and came back and lived a normal life. So moving forward again, at 17, Clara got her teaching certificate. You have to remember back then that what you could do as a woman was very limited. One of them was a teacher. So she taught around the Worcester, Massachusetts area. And remember what I said about the Worcester, Massachusetts area. 1840, and again, 1840 was the first time she refused to do the same work as a man for less pay. She won this time. 1850, she decided to go to the Clinton Liberal Institute in Clinton, New York, to further her education. There she met two people that became friends of hers, Mary and Charles Norton. They were from New Jersey, around the Bordentown area. Oh, in 1852, Clara decided to go pay him a visit. So they had a job opening at a little local school. Clara decided to take it. And one thing that bothered her was that she had to bill the parents for the school, for them attending the school. It was not free. So later, again, 1852, a job opening came up in Bordentown. You saw that picture of the Bordentown School. It was the second picture you saw in the presentation. That is still there. It's being preserved by the Bordentown Historical Society. And if you notice, it says started first public school in Bordertown. It's actually Borden Town. And it's right on the Delaware River, famous for many things, including, you've heard of Stevens Institute or Stevens College in Hoboken. He was an engineer. First steam engine, and that's one of my hobbies, so that's why I know. First steam engine in the United States. He put it together right there in Bordentown. So Bordentown has a lot of good history. So Clara started the school. They started with 6 students. So eventually it became a free public school. So she is credited with starting the first free public school in New Jersey because she did not like billing the parents. Her salary was $250 a year. Eventually they came up, her and another teacher, Fanny Child was her name, and that school had 2 floors. Second floor, the younger kids went up, and that's where their classroom was. The older kids stayed on the first. Eventually, they outgrew that school and they built a new one, where the present day Clara Barton Elementary School is. And that was rebuilt in 1954. So as I said, her salary was $250 a year. So the Bordentown School Board decided to hire a principal, a male principal, because they didn't think a woman should do that. They paid him $500 a year. Clara again objected to that. She said, I'm not doing the same work as a man for less pay. Well, they said, no, you're not getting that. So in 1854, she left. She went to Washington, D.C. And that's where she started working for the Pierce administration. And she was paid as a copy editor. She was paid 10 cents per 100 words copied, which was about $1,400 a year. So she got a good salary increase. Then the Buchanan administration came along and said, no, we're not paying a woman. She's one of the very few that worked for the federal government at that time. So she got reduced in pay. She eventually left that patent office and she returned home. This was around 1854 to 1860 she worked. Then she returned home because to visit her parents, and then she came back to Washington. And this is where the story of really what she did in the Red Cross and founding of the Red Cross that actually started us doing what we do today. Remember, she was a nurse. She was a teacher. We do nursing, we do education. Well, in 1861, you had the 6th Massachusetts Regiment come through the town. They had come down by train to Baltimore. And this is not, present day, you can go right from Baltimore to Washington. You couldn't back in 1861. They had to march to Washington, to the next station to go to Washington, D.C. Have to remember that Baltimore, Maryland was below the Mason-Dixon line. So they had a lot of people very angry that they were marching through. They threw bricks, they threw stones, they threw sticks, they shot a couple, and there were some wounded. So when they got to Washington, D.C., Clara was on hand to greet them. Found out that nobody had cared for them. So she vowed right then and there to go do something. They needed food. They needed some new clothing. They needed some medical care, bandages, things like that. So what she did, and this regiment, she knew quite a few of these soldiers. She had taught them in school. because they were from the Worcester, Massachusetts area. So this really leads into what our mission statement is for today. It's harnessing the power of volunteers with the donations, with the donors that supply our funding for us. What she did, she went out and raised money for bandages, food, clothing, all sorts of things. And they all contributed to that. And she used her, was herself as a volunteer. And there was a couple others that helped her, friends of hers. And they did that in 1861. Well, that regiment went to the Battle of Bull Run. And there she pulled up in wagons with wagon loads of supplies for the soldiers. She treated them, gave them some care, fed them. And again, I told you what we do in the Red Cross today. So we've used nursing, we've used teaching, we've used the donations of donors to support our volunteers. Well, here we go with feeding. When we open a shelter, we feed. Part of our training for sheltering is in feeding. So you've got several things now that we do in the Red Cross today that she actually did then without even thinking of the Red Cross. So we go on to the Battle of Antietam. Well, let's go before that. 1862, her father was on a sickbed. She went home. And you remember her father was a captain in the War of 1812. And he told her, he said, please care for the soldiers. Help them as much as you can and feed them, clothe them, bandage them, do something for them. He gave her, he was a Mason. He gave her her Masonic pin, which she then proceeded to wear around her neck. So let's go to Antietam. She was there. She pulled up in wagons, much like this, with wagon loads of bandages, food, clothing, anything she could do to help the soldiers. There's Dr. James Dunn, and he was from Connaught, Pennsylvania. So there's a lot of things happening from Pennsylvania, and that was one of them. When she showed up without wagon loads of supplies, he thought, heaven, if heaven ever sent out an angel, she would be the one. So he wrote a letter home to his newspaper in Connaught, stating that she was the angel of the battlefield. That name stuck for the rest of the Civil War. And after that, she met a physician, and he was also a lawyer too. His name was John J. Elwell. And though Clara never married, the two of them exchanged letters until the day that he died. He was married, and they did, that was her love interest. She maintained a picture of him on her desk, whether she was in Washington or whether she was in Glen Echo. So she never stopped nursing. In 1864, she wanted to gain equal rights for women and African Americans. I don't know if many of you ever saw the movie Glory. Glory was about an African American regiment from Massachusetts. If you saw the movie, you saw Frederick Douglass in that. And the stars were Morgan Freeman, Denzel Washington, Matthew Broderick, who was the colonel. He was the Colonel Robert Gold Shaw. And he faced a lot of flack for being the commander of that regiment. But they showed themselves well. It was the battle that you saw where they stormed the embankments of Battery Wagner on the beach in South Carolina. Before that battle started, in his tent, Clara was present. Who walks in? Who is also a nurse, Harriet Tubman. All Robert Goldshaw could say was, I am in awe of both of you. So proceeding again, and you know about the final thing in the Civil War, but in March of 1865, before the surrender at Appomattox, if I said that wrong, probably did, she was tasked by President Lincoln to reconnect the missing soldiers. She did that in Andersonville, where she assisted in the marking of 13,000 graves of Union soldiers. She was also tasked with, and this is a long word, and you know the federal government, they will give you a long name for something that could be short. Office of Correspondence with Friends of the Missing Soldiers of the United States Army. Missing soldiers. She was tasked with that. She was giving some money for that, but it was never enough. One thing she did was she went out and she gave speeches. Who did she meet and who did she befriend? How about Samuel Clemens, Ralph Waldo Emerson? And think about all the times that she was turned down for the same salary as a man for women's rights. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she shared the dais with them. And there she met Frederick Douglass. And that friendship carried on throughout the years to even to the founding of the American Red Cross. So as it says here, yes, she answered over 63,000 letters, located 22,000 missing soldiers. One thing we do in the Red Cross is called reconnection. And that is reconnecting people. When you remember the shooting in Las Vegas, I forget how many years ago that was, the Red Cross was there. You had many people that came out there and said, well, my son was here, my daughter, or my brother, or my cousin. Well, help me find them. What happened to them? And that's what we did there in Las Vegas. She did here. So we have several things now that she did before the American Red Cross was ever founded that we do now. So she needed a rest, and she's needed a rest before. She needed it in the 1850s. She needed it in the 1830s. She needed a rest again, exhausted. Her doctor said, well, go to Europe. Well, there she met the founders of the International Red Cross. And this was the International Committee of the Red Cross, as differentiated from another organization. Henri Dunant was one of the founders, along with Gustave Moynier and Dr. Louis Appia. Henri Dunant became not so active then. It was more Louis Appia. He took Clara Barton, convinced her to start a Red Cross in the US. So she stayed and she volunteered for the Franco-Prussian War. She did that for a couple years, but then again, she needed a rest again. And look at what she did and why she needed a rest. Both at the Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War, she did the same thing. She needed a rest, so she went to England. She was having problems with her sight. So she recuperated in England, came back to the US in 1873. Then she petitioned President Hayes to found the Red Cross. And at this time, no one believed that we would ever have another war like the Civil War. So Clara kept petitioning and petitioning and petitioning. So finally, she came up with the idea that Red Cross not only would do the wars, but assist in natural disasters, floods, fires, whatever happened in a disaster. So again, you're seeing that the Red Cross keeps growing and growing in the things we do today. So she finally convinced President Arthur to do that. So he said, okay. So they were meeting in a room and there was 15 people present. I don't know all 15 of them. But like I said, Frederick Douglass was one of them. Senator Omar Conger, Republican, Michigan. Representative William Lawrence, Republican, Ohio. And another gentleman, Adolphus Solomons. Many of the meetings leading up to this occurred in his room, in his house. He was from New York. Many of you have never heard of the Jewish hospital in New York, but I bet you have heard of Mount Sinai. That is what he co-founded in New York. He was a philanthropist for the Jewish religion. Another one was Mrs. Omar Conger. Another one, Mrs. Martha Canfield. Alex Garvin, V.R. Mussey, Bancroft Davis. And many of these people were lawyers. Why did they have so many lawyers? Because they were drawing up a charter. So that charter was signed by Frederick Douglass. Why did he sign that? He was the recorder of deeds for the District of Columbia. So that started May 21st, 1881. First vice president was William Lawrence. And remember, Adolphus Simon Solomons. He later served 2 terms as vice president. So Clara was number 1, but there were 14 others contributing to her effort. It's a team effort, which is what we do now in the Red Cross. Excuse me. We are a team. I serve on Lynn's team. I serve on other people's team, but we work together. So 1883, after the signing, and she convinced the president to sign that Geneva Convention. 1883, they went over to Europe. And again, with the International Federation of the Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross. That is a Swiss-based unit. They're the ones that will have people in conflict areas doing nursing, physicians, things like that. They were there in Syria when a couple of them were kidnapped. So 1883, Adolphus Solomons became a vice president of the International Committee of the Red Cross. So Clara, back here, and you had the floods in Johnstown. Red Cross was there. After the floods, Clara realized they needed a place to shelter the afflicted people, population of Johnstown. So she had a large building built that housed a couple hundred people. That same firm that did that turned around years later and built Clara's home in Glen Echo. That was the last house you saw in the video where many people were standing on the balcony. That was Clara's home, but big enough to have people stay. So after the Johnstown floods, you see there were the South Carolina hurricanes. First hurricane relief, international relief effort in Armenia. And do we contribute to international relief? Yes, we do, many times over. Spanish-American War. Again, aiding servicemen, advocates for female nurses, and nursing was still in its infancy then. Galveston, Texas, another hurricane. And that was her last response that Clara directed. So Clara left the Red Cross in 1904, and there was a lot of people that said, enough of Clara. The reason being is she was good with certain things, but not with the handling of money so much. So to go on with the history of the Red Cross and Clara then founded the National First Aid Society, where she created the first aid kit. So you see, add that first aid to what the Red Cross does nowadays. We have classes on first aid, which you can sign up for. We teach you how to use an AED, automatic electronic defibrillator. We teach you how to do CPR. So Clara never left. She did that, and she lived in Glen Echo, which is now a historical site run by the federal government. Unfortunately, it's still closed due to COVID. So going back to the International Committee of the Red Cross, we now have the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. That was founded in 1919. Woodrow Wilson did that. Because in 1914, we were in Europe administering first aid to both co-belligerents until the German Austria-Hungary found out we were going to aid and we were going to go to war. They dropped us. And at that time, we had 4 employees. Ernest Bickel was the name of the gentleman over in Europe doing all that. So for that World War I, there was about 100 million plus population in the United States. 33 million gave $1 each to become members of the Red Cross. 33 million in World War I bought a lot of bandages. And you'll see, if you ever see any pictures, you ever go to the Sickle Museum in Allenton, in Easton, you'll see some pictures of what Red Crossers did in the Lehigh Valley in World War I. They made bandages. They collected clothing. They made socks. They made shirts, things like that for the soldiers. So we've always supported the military back from 1861, going back to the influence of Clara's father. And by the way, that medal he gave her saved her from being wounded one day on the battlefield. So the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent is the organization that's outside on the borders of Ukraine now, administering all kinds of things. The US, the American Red Cross has some employees there. They are dedicated to our armed forces members, and they are also dedicated to feeding. So we are present. We have donated money. I know told you my hobby's trains. Canadian Pacific Rail donated $500,000 to the Canadian Red Cross for Ukraine relief. Ukraine Red Cross are the ones operating in Ukraine now. So you have a whole host of things, and Adolphus Solomons, you probably never heard of him, but I happened to find him by accident. So you have Frederick Douglass, and I've been to a Harriet Tubman museum in Cape May. Frederick Douglass picture was on the wall. So actually, Harriet Tubman was actually a nurse. And that's one thing that Clara did during the Civil War. She trained African-American nurses. So that is it for Clara. The history of the Red Cross keeps on and on and on. Doing CPR was something they started in the 1950s, called the chest lift and arm lift method. And it's changed so many times, because I served on a rescue squad and for 13 years, and CPR didn't change then, but when I had to take it as a pharmacist, it changed. So CPR has changed many times, and it keeps changing as they learn more and more. So that's it for Clara. If you have questions, there is much, much more. Here you see our mission statement, that we prevent and alleviate human suffering. And we do that by the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. She did that back in 1861. And then she further used logistics. In other words, storing all these supplies in warehouses because she had too many of them. That's where she loaded the wagons from. So you have nursing, you have teaching, you have logistics, you have our service to the armed forces, you have reconnection, you have first aid, and so much more that we do today. She did then. So thank you. And I needed some water. My voice is losing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that fabulous overview of Clara's life prior to the Red Cross and her creation of the Red Cross. You know, like Bill shared, everything we do, our values, everything we do around the world, the foundation of our work, we're compassionate, we're collaborative, we're credible, we're committed, we're creative. And, you know, all of this stuff that we do is because of Clara Barton. And we really do live and breathe our values and mission statement every single day. And when Bill's talking about the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, any organization that is a part of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement has to adhere to these 7 fundamental principles. So when people ask, you know, well, what ties us together? Well, it's this: humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, and universality. And I always like to say, you know, 90% of everything that the Red Cross does is through volunteers. We would not do the fabulous things that we do. So our services, like Bill said, you know, we're down the street across the country and around the world. A lot of people know us mainly for Bloods and Floods, but we do so much more. The 5 areas of the American Red Cross that we work in today specifically are services to the armed forces. Most people have no idea that we support and provide services to current military members, to veterans and their families. We offer resiliency workshops to veterans transitioning out of service, casework resources and services to current military members and their families. We have our biomedical services, which is our blood services program. We collect blood, and we couldn't do that without the generosity of our blood donor, but also the generosity of the locations who host blood drives for us around our 5-county footprint. We have also have blood donor ambassadors, which is a volunteer role at the blood drives. We have blood transportation specialists. These are folks who drive the blood from the drives to the processing center, or from the processing center to the hospitals. And then there's disaster services. So hurricane season is upon us. It's starting June 1st. It's another above average season. I believe they said they're expecting 19 to 21 named storms. I think they say that, I believe it was 7 will be higher than a category 3, and they're expecting 3 to 4 of those to make landfall. So, you know, last year we had Hurricane Ida here locally, and we opened up 700 cases for recovery client care. And we always have a huge need for folks who can deploy locally and domestically when these disasters strike. So if you're interested in doing anything like that, you can start training now and be prepared to go when Mother Nature decides it's time. And, you know, there's always wildfires happening. So these are a lot of the things that our disaster cycle services do, you know, the tornadoes, and we actually have our disaster mental health and spiritual care teams down in Texas right now. And I know we had also sent a staff person, one of our volunteers, up to Buffalo. So we do those kinds of things with regard to disasters. Our training services, as all of our CPR first aid, like Bill mentioned, where what Clara started, lifeguarding now, babysitting, and certification of a lot of other services. And when you become a Red Cross volunteer, you can get your CPR first aid training for free as a benefit, and that's typically $110 value. So it's a good perk. And then there's international services. So, you know, with our international services, one of the big things that we do is the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccinations around the world, and we've helped reduce MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella by 80%. But right now we are in the Ukraine, working with other teams. We are providing assistance. We've been there for 8 years. The Red Cross has, you know, provided fuel, heating, medical supplies. So it's not just when times of disaster. We have been on the outskirts and serving the region. And for our part, the Red Cross, as Bill mentioned, you know, we have staff who are deployed to Romania, Moldova, Poland, and other countries to support the humanitarian relief right now for Ukraine. So, and these are highly trained crisis responders that are supporting the on the ground relief efforts alongside of local teams. So it's not like, this is not an opportunity where people can call up and say, hey, can you send me to Ukraine? No, that's not quite how it works. But there are lots of other things that people can do to support the Ukrainian efforts. And as Bill mentioned, we have staff over there. So there are armed service members over there, and we have staff that are supporting the service to the armed forces, to countries neighboring, and they're basically supporting the emergency communication needs of the military members so that they can stay in touch with their family members back here in the United States. We're also, you know, distributing comfort kits containing hygiene items and other necessities. So, and you know, the other part of international thing that we do is, which Clara started, is international humanitarian law, which is the body of law that limits the effects of armed conflict by protecting those who are not or are no longer taking part in hostilities, and by restricting the means and methods of warfare. So these rules of war strike a balance between military necessity on the one hand and preservation of human dignity and protection of vulnerable populations on the other. So we have several volunteer opportunities available right now. We're always focusing, we are focusing on blood transportation specialists. It's a role that does have to go in and out of the city. So some people like to drive in the city and some who don't. And you may be delivering blood to hospitals where people are, and teams are actually maybe waiting for the blood for a surgery, or picking up the blood and taking it to the processing center so all the testing can be run on it so it's ready to go and be processed to go out to folks who need it. We also have a need for our disaster action team members right now. We're always looking for folks who want to offer help and hope after a disaster, big or small. So in our area, typically it's home fires, but on occasion we open up shelters in our area where we need shelter associates. And these are folks who help with feeding and other tasks to make sure the individuals and families who come into the shelter receive what they need to move forward with their recovery. And then we have a duty officer position, which is totally virtual. You can do from your own home. And it only requires you to do 2 4-hour shifts a month. So that's a pretty easy lift. And basically what you do as a duty officer is you're the kind of ringmaster when a call comes in from police or fire and they ask the Red Cross to respond. You're the person that helps get the volunteers, make sure we have the appropriate response, and that we get those boots on the ground as soon as possible. So, and you can do all that from your own home. So those are just some of the highlighted positions we have right now. We just, you know, we hope this gave you a great understanding of our founder of Clara Barton. I want to thank Bill. You know, Clara was a woman, a teacher, a nurse, a humanitarian. She was a woman before her time. She did so many things, and you know, we all hope to try and walk in her footprints, but they're big ones to fill. So So we're just hoping that, you might want to spring into action with us. It's your invitation to join us. You can scan the QR codes, and they will definitely take you to the landing page where you can complete an application if you're interested. But right now, here's our contact information. And if you have questions, let's open it up. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lynn and Bill. Thank you for the information on Clara and on the important work that the American Red Cross has been doing. Thanks to Clara initially. A couple of questions about Clara from our in-person attendee here at the library. She wants to know, did Clara go to college and did she speak any other languages?
Not that I know of on the other languages. The college then was the Clinton Liberal Institute, maybe more like to a community college nowadays. Her teaching certificate, she had to pass certain tests and things like that in Massachusetts, but no real college that she went to as we would know it today. Also, too, I want to add one thing, that we talk a lot about diversity. We were diverse for our time when we were founded. That meeting of 15 people, you had 3 women present. You had an African American. You had a member of the Jewish faith. For that time, that didn't happen. So we were very diverse for that time in our founding. But Clara, again, she learned by doing. She had no formal teaching for nursing. And back then, not too many places where you could go to learn to be a nurse. So she learned on the battlefield and what to do, and from her experience with her brother. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Questions from anyone else on Zoom? Feel free to unmute yourself or type it into the chat. Okay, don't see anything coming here. Did see one thank you in the chat for the informative program. All right, with that, I guess we will call it a night. Again, Bill and Lynn, thank you so much.
Give you a couple other things, Mark, that we do.
Yeah.
We have the only Red Cross house in the country. It's located in Philadelphia. And Lynn can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure. That is where people who have been forced out of their homes, families, can come and stay. We feed them. We have a place for them to stay that's safe. And we have volunteers working out of that and employees. We also have what in our blood center at 7th and Spring Garden, it's called a histocompatibility lab, which is a tissue compatibility. So if you're undergoing a transplant, something like that nature, a skin graft, something like that, we do that there. And as far as I know, that may be the only one in the United States that the Red Cross runs.
Well, it definitely is for the Red Cross House. So it is located at 40th and Powelton. And when families have nowhere else to go and no means to go anywhere else, they do get to come to the Red Cross House. Typically the stay is anywhere. They like it to be that, we want to get people on the road to recovery. So we have recovery client caseworkers that help them, get them connected to the resources they need to recover and move forward. Really, they're there providing that hope, those volunteers and staff. And some people, I think, it's 2 weeks to 3 months. And I think we even had one family stay one time 6 months. The Red Cross House was closed during COVID, but it just recently opened back up in April. And there's definitely a need for folks also. I mean, I could go on and on about our volunteer needs, but if you're interested in sitting at the front desk and answering phone calls at the Red Cross House and, interacting with some of those families, we have a need for those volunteers as well. So again, if you scan the QR code or reach out to me or shoot me an email. I'm happy to talk with you about any of those opportunities. So yes, it's the only one in the country. With regard to the lab, I am not a biomedical expert. I would have to Google that, but our lab is world class here. If you ever get an opportunity to take a tour to learn about all the different kinds of matching and screening that goes on with the blood products to make them safe, that's required by the Federal Drug Administration. It's an amazing tour. So yes, great things, great things. So thanks, Bill, for mentioning that.
Okay. I think we should call it a night. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right.
Thank you, Mark. Have a nice evening, everybody. Take
You're
care.
welcome.
Yeah.
All right. Take care now. Good night.
Bye-bye.